this module, we will focus on feedback. Teachers spend a great deal of time providing students feedback. This feedback includes grades, which can communicate to students where they are in relation to learning goals. However, grades alone don't help students improve. Feedback identifying what students do well, what they need to do next, and how to do it accelerates learning for students. So in this module, we describe feedback to be target and focused, given frequently and in a timely manner, communicated with student-friendly language, differentiated for student needs, used by students, and tangible with clearly defined actions students can follow. In this course, we've often compared a remote learning strategy to how it's applied in the face-to-face setting. Certainly, the importance of feedback is equally important in the remote setting as it is in face-to-face. However, there is a different dynamic when applying feedback strategies in remote learning. We are going to have to make some shifts in how we apply this practice. There are some unique challenges when applying the feedback practice in remote learning. First, feedback in remote learning takes more time. You won't be replying to students in real time. Instead, you'll be opening docs and leaving comments. To manage your workload, you will need to reflect on what feedback students actually need to move forward. Next, students don't always pay attention to feedback, and less so in a remote setting. So, you will need to shift your thinking to create explicit opportunities for students to read and use the feedback they receive. Finally, being conscious of the importance of supporting the social and emotional state of your students is critical when providing feedback. As you apply this practice, a shift you will make will be how you can increase your personal connections with students. As you work through this module, think about how the tips provided makes feedback authentic for students and manageable for you. Tip number 1, reflect on the amount of graded assignments. Everything takes longer in the remote learning environment for students and teachers. If you're struggling to keep up with feedback, reflect on whether the amount of work you've assigned is realistic both for you and your students at this time. Perhaps a less than more lens would promote success in both giving and taking feedback. Even when you feel assignments are realistic, time you spend on feedback won't automatically be improved. Let's look at our tips on how to manage. Tip number 2, prioritize the feedback you provide. You want to provide students with enough feedback to move forward in their learning. You also want to resist the temptation to direct students to fix everything. The D303 playbook strategy, narrowing the amount or scope of feedback given, guides you to find the just right amount and type of feedback that students need. You'll find it in the Resources and Tools section of this module. Tip number 3, create a list of frequently used feedback. After you've narrowed the scope of feedback you'll focus on, craft a bank of feedback comments that you can easily cut and paste into comment fields, emails, etc. The Utilizing Banks of Comments playbook entry provides details of how to organize for this strategy. We've got a great idea for how to manage your comments in the digital environment. The permanent clipboard extension makes copying and pasting feedback much more efficient. Check it out in our resources section. Tip number 4, try whole group feedback. This strategy works great when you find yourself repeating the same feedback over and over. The trends you're seeing could be communicated to the whole group rather than repeated to individuals. The feedback letter playbook strategy outlines how this whole group feedback could be generated. You could even share as a letter or comment in person as part of a video message to students. Tip number 5, use tech tools that automate feedback. There are many tech tools that can automatically grade student responses and provide appropriate feedback. Computer-generated feedback lets students know when they are on track. Some tools can even provide hints for help. Besides relieving the burden of the educator providing all the feedback, these tools increase student engagement due to the just-in-time feedback. In the Tools and Resources section, we'll show you how to create automatically graded questions in Google Forms, Edpuzzle, and Schoology. Tip number 6, provide audio feedback. Audio feedback may be a more efficient way for you to generate feedback. It's also a great option for reaching students who may not be able to access written information. In our Resources section, we show you different ways on how to generate audio feedback to your students. Tip number 7, facilitate student-to-student feedback. Students also have valuable feedback to share with one another. This, of course, takes some prep so that students can generate meaningful feedback. Tag feedback and Critical Friends peer review are playbook entries that identify the considerations educators make as they plan to engage students in peer-to-peer feedback. There are also great tools for students to use to give peer feedback from their remote environments. We'll share ideas for using Flipgrid, Schoology, and Google Docs to facilitate student-to-student feedback. Tip number 8, focus on fixing. In a remote environment, feedback will be inefficient unless it is purposeful and targeted. Engage your students by showing them how to use feedback to fix their mistakes. Adopting the feed-forward strategy helps both educator and student realize that feedback is embedded in the learning process rather than a result of it. Tip number 9, show students where to find their feedback. In a remote environment, you will get more students interacting with their feedback if it is in a consistent place that students can easily navigate. Try not to rely on emails alone, but use the features of your learning management system. In the Resources section, you'll learn how students can see teacher feedback on their assignments, revise them, and resubmit them. This is a skill you will want to teach your students right away. Tip number 10, try a 2-column rubric. Rubrics are feedback. When you want to let a student know how they are meeting the learning target or whether they're needing to revise, you could put your rubric to work for you. A 2-point rubric is quick to make and easy for students to navigate. When feedback is easy to understand, students are more likely to apply it in their work. Tip number 11, show you care. We all care about our students. Now more than ever, reminding them will give them the incentive to engage in your feedback. Tip number 12, use a strength-based approach to giving feedback. In the Relationships module, we introduced you to the 3-to-1 positive to negative interaction strategy for communicating with students in a remote environment. This strategy lets students know you notice their efforts and the thinking they have put into their work. When giving personal feedback, start with the strengths. Start by thanking them for their efforts and identifying something they did well. Then ask them to try again, identifying specifically what you would like them to add or change. The message students receive is that if they try again, they will feel a sense of accomplishment rather than to give up for fear of failure. Here's some great sentence stems to use in your feedback. It's critical that students continue to receive feedback in the remote environment. This practice can be challenging for teachers to manage and for students to make use of. Therefore, make sure to focus on the feedback students really need, teach students how to find and use the feedback you provide, and integrate personal connections. Now it's time for you to personalize your learning with the resources supporting these tips.